Simone had always been independent, but when Christopher suggested that his driver take her wherever she needed to go, she refused outright. She didn't want to feel like a prisoner in his home, but one evening she deeply regretted her decision. She had gone to the market to buy some personal essentials, and as she walked toward the road to get a cab, a black SUV pulled up beside her. Before she could react, two men jumped out, grabbing her arms. Panic shot through her as she struggled against their grip. "Let me go!" she screamed, kicking and thrashing. Suddenly, another car screeched to a halt behind them. Christopher. He moved faster than Simone had ever seen, yanking one of the men off her and landing a solid punch to his jaw. The second man tried to run, but Christopher's security had arrived just in time. Within seconds, the attackers were subdued, and Simone found herself trembling against the car door, her breath ragged. Christopher turned to her, his eyes flashing with something raw and terrifying. "Are you okay? Did they hurt you?" She shook her head, too shocked to speak. He pulled her into his car, his grip on her wrist firm but careful. "You're never going anywhere alone again," he stated, his voice dangerously low. Simone could only stare at him. For the first time, she realized that Christopher Aiken wasn't just protecting her because she lived in his house. He was protecting her because he wanted to. Simone lay awake that night, replaying the attack over and over in her mind. If Christopher hadn't shown up when he did, she didn't even want to think about what could have happened. Simone Oko walked through the bustling streets of Lagos with her worn-out handbag clutched tightly against her chest. The scorching afternoon sun bore down on her dark skin, making her sweat trickle down her back. She had spent the entire morning moving from one office to another, hoping to find a job, any job, that would keep her from returning to the house she dreaded. The thought of her stepmother's piercing insults and her father's silent disapproval sent a shiver down her spine. She couldn't go back there. She needed to stand on her own, to prove that she was more than the weak girl they constantly belittled. Her feet ached as she turned onto a busy street lined with towering office buildings. A particular sign caught her attention. Aiken Holdings now hiring. Personal assistant to the CEO. Simone's breath hitched. She had heard of Aiken Holdings before. It was one of the largest business empires in Nigeria, and its CEO, Christopher Aiken, was said to be a nightmare. Ruthless, arrogant, and cold-hearted, he had fired more assistants than anyone could count. But Simone was desperate. She squared her shoulders, took a deep breath, and stepped inside. The reception area was intimidatingly modern, with marble floors and high ceilings. A stern-looking receptionist barely glanced at her before handing her a form. Simone filled it out with shaky hands, her heart pounding in her chest. Within minutes, she was called into an office for an impromptu interview. To her surprise, the interviewer barely looked at her credentials before sighing. "You're hired. Start tomorrow at 7 a.m. sharp. Don't be late." Relief flooded her. She had a job, a real job. As she stepped out of the building, she allowed herself a small, victorious smile. She had no idea that stepping into Aiken Holdings would change her life forever. Simone barely got any sleep the night before her first day. She spent the entire night researching Aiken Holdings, hoping to impress her new boss. By 6:30 a.m., she was already outside the towering building, dressed in her neatly pressed but slightly worn-out blouse and skirt. Taking a deep breath, she stepped inside, ignoring the butterflies in her stomach. The office was already bustling with employees who seemed too busy to notice her. She asked for directions to the CEO's office, and a kind elderly woman who introduced herself as Mrs. Jade led her there. "Don't let him intimidate you," the old secretary whispered before pushing open the heavy door. Christopher Aiken sat behind a massive mahogany desk, his sharp eyes scanning documents. He didn't even glance at Simone as she stepped inside. "You're late," he said coldly, though she was right on time. "Grab those files and start taking notes. If you can't keep up, leave now." Simone's hands trembled as she fumbled with the papers, her mind scrambling to keep up with his rapid instructions. She made several mistakes, accidentally knocking over a pen holder, misunderstanding a financial term, and even tripping over the carpet at one point. Christopher's irritated sighs filled the room. I don't have time for incompetence, he muttered under his breath. Tears burned at the back of Simone's eyes, but she swallowed them down. She needed this job. She refused to let him scare her away. Determined, she straightened her back, focused harder, and decided that no matter what, she would prove herself. Days turned into weeks, and though Simone still struggled, she was learning fast. Mrs. Jade became her mentor, teaching her how to anticipate Christopher's moods and handle his impossible expectations. But Christopher himself remained as distant as ever. He never addressed her by name, simply calling her assistant whenever he needed something. Then one fateful morning, everything changed. Simone arrived at the office with a visible bruise on her cheek and a cut on her lip. The previous night, while walking home, a group of thugs had attempted to mug her. Though she had fought back, she hadn't escaped unscathed. She tried to keep her head down and focus on work, but when Christopher walked into the office and saw her face, he froze. For the first time since she started working there, his expression was unreadable. He stood still, eyes locked on her injuries. Then, to everyone's shock, his voice dropped into a dangerously low tone. "Who did this to you?" Simone stammered, caught off guard by his concern. It was nothing, sir. Just some guys on the street. I'm fine." The streets of Lagos were never completely safe, but Simone had always been cautious. She didn't have a car yet and could only afford a small, one-bedroom apartment a few blocks from the office. Most nights she hurried home before it got too late, but that evening she had stayed back at work, organizing Christopher's files for an early morning meeting. By the time she stepped out, the streets were nearly deserted. She was only a few minutes from her apartment when she sensed footsteps behind her. A quick glance over her shoulder confirmed her worst fear. 3 men, their eyes gleaming with bad intentions, were following her. Panic surged through her veins as she quickened her pace, clutching her bag close to her chest. But it was too late. "Hey, fine girl, where your day rush go?" one of them sneered, stepping in front of her. Simone's heart pounded. "Please, I don't have anything valuable," she stammered, hoping they would just take her bag and leave. One of them lunged for her purse and instinct took over. Simone fought back, using her elbow to jab the closest attacker in the ribs. The move stunned him, giving her a moment to kick another one in the shin, but she was outnumbered. One of them grabbed her hair and punched her in the face, sending her sprawling onto the rough pavement. Dazed, she barely registered their laughter as they snatched her purse and ran pain-shot through her cheek, and her vision blurred. She touched her face and felt the warm trickle of blood. A black eye. Tears welled up as she dragged herself up, stumbling home, her body aching from the attack. That night, she curled into her bed and cried the reality of her loneliness and helplessness crashing down on her. She had no one to call, no one to comfort her. For the first time in a long time, she felt completely and utterly alone. Simone tried to cover the bruise on her face with makeup, but it was no use. The swelling was too obvious. She didn't want to miss work, so she took a deep breath and walked into Aiken Holdings, keeping her head down. But the moment Christopher Aiken saw her, the entire office went silent. He was in the middle of signing documents when he looked up, his gaze locking onto her face. His pen froze midair. His sharp eyes darkened with an emotion she couldn't place. "Who did that to you?" His voice was cold, but there was something else beneath it, something dangerous. Simone swallowed. "It's nothing, sir. Just some guys on the street. I handled it." His chair scraped back abruptly as he stood up, walking around his desk until he was in front of her. His fingers clenched at his sides, his jaw tightening. The entire office held its breath. "You handled it?" His voice dropped into a deadly whisper. "A black eye and a busted lip? That's what you call handling it?" Simone shifted uncomfortably. She had never seen this side of him. He was always cold, dismissive, never this furious. She opened her mouth to speak, but before she could, he made a decision that shocked them both. "You're moving in with me." Her breath caught. "Excuse me?" "I said, you're moving in with me." His tone was final, leaving no room for argument. "You'll be safer in my house." Simone was too stunned to respond. Was this really happening? Did Christopher Aiken, Lagos's most ruthless billionaire, actually care about her safety? Simone sat stiffly in Christopher's sleek black Mercedes as he drove through the busy streets of Lagos. She had barely processed his demand before he had pulled her into his car, barking orders at his driver to follow them with her few belongings. The tension in the vehicle was suffocating, but Christopher seemed unbothered, his attention focused on the road. Every now and then his eyes flickered toward her swollen cheek, his fingers tightening on the steering wheel. When they pulled up to her apartment building, Christopher leaned back in his seat, taking in the rundown structure with an amused smirk. "This is where you live? No wonder you got robbed. This place looks like a death trap." Simone bit her tongue, resisting the urge to defend herself. She knew her apartment wasn't much, but it was all she could afford while saving for her masters abroad. Ignoring his mocking tone, she rushed inside and quickly packed the essentials: her clothes, a few books, and, most importantly, a small framed portrait of her late mother. It was the only picture she had left of her, and she refused to leave without it. When she emerged, Christopher arched an eyebrow at the small bag in her hand. "That's all you're taking?" "Yes," she replied, clutching the portrait tightly. He shook his head in disbelief but didn't argue. "Fine, let's go. You have a lot to adjust to." As the car pulled away from the apartment, Simone stole one last glance at the place she had called home, wondering what exactly she was walking into. The next morning, Simone woke up in a lavish guest room in Christopher's mansion, something straight out of a luxury magazine. She barely had time to take in her surroundings before Christopher knocked on her door, his voice sharp. "Get dressed, we're going out." She frowned. "Where to?" "Shopping. You need new clothes." Simone wanted to protest, but she knew better than to argue with him. She had barely unpacked when he ushered her into his car again, this time driving to one of the most exclusive boutiques in Lagos. When they walked inside, the attendants practically fell over themselves to cater to him. Christopher leaned against a plush lounge chair as Simone was led into the changing rooms, with armfuls of expensive dresses, casual wear, and, much to her horror lingerie, "This is unnecessary," she muttered under her breath, as she eyed the delicate lace in her hands. "Just try them on," he called lazily from outside. With a deep sigh, she slipped into a deep red gown, the silky fabric hugging her curves perfectly. Taking a hesitant step out, she glanced at Christopher, expecting his usual indifference. But the moment he saw her, everything in the store went still. For a brief moment, his cold, unreadable expression wavered. His eyes darkened as they raked over her, his grip on his glass tightening. He looked almost mesmerized. Simone shifted uncomfortably. "What? Do I look ridiculous?" Christopher blinked, quickly masking his reaction. He scoffed, picking up his phone to avoid looking at her. "It's fine. Pick whatever you want." But Simone wasn't fooled. Something had changed, and for the first time she wondered if Christopher Ucken was truly as indifferent to her as he pretended to be. The ride back to Christopher's mansion was strangely tense. Simone sat quietly, her new shopping bags stacked beside her, while Christopher gripped the steering wheel like he was holding himself back from something. His usual arrogance was gone, replaced with a stormy silence. She stole a glance at him, confusion creeping in. "Did I do something wrong?" Christopher's jaw tensed. "No." "Then why do you look like you're mad at me?" She pressed. His grip tightened. "I'm not mad at you." But he was. He didn't know why, but something about seeing her in that dress, watching the way every man in the store had stolen glances at her, had infuriated him. He hated how she was affecting him, how she made him notice things he shouldn't be noticing. "Just sit quietly," he muttered, his voice strained. Simone huffed but obeyed. The rest of the drive was silent, but the air between them was anything but calm. And Christopher knew one thing for certain: Simone Oko was becoming a dangerous distraction. Simone stepped into Christopher's mansion with a mix of awe and discomfort. The massive space, filled with modern furnishings and art, felt nothing like home. It was luxurious, yes, but cold, just like the man who owned it. As she walked through the marble hallways, she caught glimpses of the staff watching her curiously, whispering amongst themselves. Christopher led her to her room, opening the door to reveal an elegantly furnished suite, complete with a walk-in closet and a bathroom that looked bigger than her entire apartment. "You'll stay here," he said simply, his tone unreadable. Simone hesitated. Are you sure about this? I can find another place. I said you'll stay here, he interrupted, his gaze unwavering. It's safer. No arguments. She swallowed her pride and nodded. It wasn't like she had any better options. As she placed her bag on the bed, she pulled out her mother's portrait, setting it on the nightstand. A wave of longing washed over her. No matter where she was, her mother was the one thing that kept her grounded. Dinner is at 7, Christopher said before walking out. Don't be late. Simone sighed as the door clicked shut. Living with Christopher Akin was going to be an adjustment, but she wasn't about to let him intimidate her. Simone sat at the grand dining table, feeling out of place as a team of chefs brought out an elaborate meal. Christopher sat across from her, his expression as unreadable as ever. The air was thick with tension, making every bite feel forced. So do you plan to just sit there quietly all night? He asked, sipping his wine. Simone frowned. I didn't realize I was supposed to entertain you. His lips twitched as if amused. You're always so defensive. And you're always so arrogant, she shot back before she could stop herself. Silence. For a moment she thought she had pushed too far, but then Christopher let out a low chuckle. It was the first time she had seen him truly smile, and it unnerved her more than his usual cold demeanor. At least you're honest, he mused, leaning back in his chair. That's rare. Simone looked away, her heart pounding for reasons she didn't understand. She wasn't here to be drawn into his games. She was here because she needed safety. That was all, or at least, that's what she told herself. Christopher found himself watching Simone more than he should. The way she moved around the house, the way she tucked her curls behind her ear when she was deep in thought. It was becoming a problem. He had brought her here for safety, but now she was invading his mind, making him question things he had never bothered to care about. She was different. She didn't fawn over him like other women. She challenged him, and somehow that irritated and intrigued him at the same time. One evening he walked into the library only to find her curled up on the couch, reading. She looked up in surprise. I didn't think you used this place. I don't, he admitted, stepping closer. But it seems you do. She nodded, holding up her book. I like stories. They help me escape. Christopher watched her, realizing that he wanted to know what she was escaping from. But he wasn't the kind of man who asked personal questions. Instead, he simply nodded and turned to leave. Good night, Simone. She blinked at the rare use of her name, but before she could respond, he was gone. And for the first time in a long time, Christopher Akin felt unsettled by something other than business. The next day, Simone received a call from an old university friend, Daniel, who worked in finance. He had heard she was staying with Christopher and had reached out to check on her. They decided to meet for lunch in a nearby cafe. When Christopher found out, he wasn't pleased. You're going out? He asked that morning, his tone sharp. Yes, I'm meeting a friend, Simone replied casually, slipping on her shoes. His jaw tensed. What friend? She raised an eyebrow. Daniel, we studied together. A man? Simone narrowed her eyes. Why does that matter? Christopher didn't answer. Instead, he grabbed his coat and strode out without another word. But later that evening, when she returned, she noticed the shift. He barely spoke to her, his mood icy and distant. When she asked if something was wrong, he only gave her a clipped, nothing. But Simone knew better. Christopher Akin, Lagos's most composed billionaire, was jealous. And she had no idea why. The tension in the mansion was unbearable. Christopher barely spoke to Simone, his cold demeanor even more intense than usual. She could feel his gaze on her, watching from the shadows. But he never addressed what was truly bothering him. Simone, on the other hand, refused to acknowledge his sudden mood swings. If he had a problem, he needed to say it outright. One evening, as she walked past his study, she heard him speaking on the phone. His voice was sharper than usual. No, I don't need a security detail on her. I'll handle it myself. His tone was clipped, impatient. Simone's brows furrowed. Was he protecting her? And if so, why did he make it seem like such an inconvenience? Deciding she had had enough of his attitude, She knocked on the door before pushing it open. If you have something to say, just say it, Christopher. You've been acting strange since yesterday. Christopher looked up, his gaze unreadable. For a moment, it seemed like he was going to ignore her, but then he sighed, rubbing his temple. I don't like being questioned, Simone. She crossed her arms. And I don't like being treated like a problem you can't solve. His lips pressed into a thin line. Go to bed, Simone. She scoffed, shaking her head. Coward, she muttered as she turned on her heels and walked away. Christopher watched her leave, his hands clenched into fists. He wasn't sure what was happening, but Simone Oko was quickly becoming his greatest weakness. The next day, Christopher decided he needed a distraction. And what better way to clear his mind than a night out at one of Lagos's most elite lounges? He had avoided bringing women around since Simone moved in, but tonight he wanted to prove to himself that she meant nothing to him. Simone, however, was not amused when she found out about his plans. Sitting in the living room, she overheard his butler confirming his reservations for two at an exclusive lounge. She rolled her eyes. So this was his way of dealing with his emotions? Running off to some model type just to prove he didn't care? Christopher walked downstairs dressed in a sharp black suit, exuding power and confidence. Don't wait up, he said casually. Simone smirked. Trust me, I won't. He hesitated for a fraction of a second before walking out, his jaw tight. But as the night dragged on, he found himself restless, even with a stunning woman at his side. She laughed at his jokes, leaned into him, but it all felt wrong. He barely lasted 2 hours before calling it a night. When he returned home, he expected Simone to be asleep. Instead, he found her curled up on the couch watching a movie. She barely looked at him. Done proving your point? He stiffened. I don't know what you're talking about. She chuckled softly, shaking her head. Of course you don't. Good night, Christopher. For the second time in weeks, Christopher Aiken was left feeling completely out of control. Simone had always been independent, but when Christopher suggested that his driver take her wherever she needed to go, she refused outright. She didn't want to feel like a prisoner in his home, but one evening she deeply regretted her decision. She had gone to the market to buy some personal essentials, and as she walked toward the road to get a cab, a black SUV pulled up beside her. Before she could react, two men jumped out, grabbing her arms. Panic shot through her as she struggled against their grip. Let me go, she screamed, kicking and thrashing. Suddenly, another car screeched to a halt behind them. Christopher. He moved faster than Simone had ever seen, yanking one of the men off her and landing a solid punch to his jaw. The second man tried to run, but Christopher's security had arrived just in time. Within seconds, the attackers were subdued, and Simone found herself trembling against the car door, her breath ragged. Christopher turned to her, his eyes flashing with something raw and terrifying. Are you okay? Did they hurt you? She shook her head, too shocked to speak. He pulled her into his car, his grip on her wrist firm but careful. You're never going anywhere alone again, he stated, his voice dangerously low. Simone could only stare at him. For the first time, she realized that Christopher Aiken wasn't just protecting her because she lived in his house. He was protecting her because he wanted to. Simone lay awake that night, replaying the attack over and over in her mind. If Christopher hadn't shown up when he did, she didn't even want to think about what could have happened. She sat up, wrapping her arms around herself, when a knock on the door startled her. Christopher walked in, looking tired but still impossibly put together. Can't sleep? She shook her head, and without waiting for an invitation, he sat on the edge of her bed. I should have insisted on the driver. I should have... Stop blaming yourself, Simone interrupted softly. You didn't know that would happen. He exhaled slowly, rubbing a hand over his face. I don't like not being in control. And when I saw you like that... He stopped himself, shaking his head. I was furious and terrified. Simone's breath caught. Christopher Aiken, the ruthless CEO, was admitting fear. It was the most human she had ever seen him. Why do you care so much? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time she saw something vulnerable beneath his usual hard exterior. I don't know, he admitted, but I do. A charged silence filled the room. Simone's heart pounded as Christopher reached out, his fingers brushing against her hand before he quickly pulled away, standing up. "Get some rest, Simone." And with that, he walked out, leaving her more confused than ever. Because for the first time, she believed him. The atmosphere at Akin Holdings had been light that morning, with employees engaging in casual chatter before the workday officially began. Simone was reviewing reports at her desk when Toby, one of the finance executives, approached with a charming smile. "Hey, Simone," he greeted, leaning casually against her desk. "I was wondering if you'd like to grab lunch with me later. It's been a while since we had a proper conversation." Simone smiled politely. "Oh, Toby, that's sweet of you, but I have a lot of work to get through today. Maybe another time?" Toby nodded understandingly, but added, "No pressure, but I'll hold you to that. It's always a pleasure talking to you." Before Simone could respond, the sharp sound of a chair scraping across the floor interrupted them. Christopher stood at his office door, his eyes locked on Toby with a glare that could freeze fire. The entire office went silent. "Don't you have work to do, Toby?" Christopher's voice was dangerously low. Toby blinked, taken aback. Yes, sir, I was just—" "Then do it. Now." Christopher's tone left no room for argument. Toby hesitated before offering Simone a brief smile and walking away. The moment he was gone, Christopher turned his attention to Simone, his expression stormy. "Do I need to remind you that this is a workplace and not a social club?" Simone's brows shot up. "Excuse me? You're here to work, not to entertain suitors," Christopher snapped. A heated anger burned in Simone's chest, but she clenched her jaw, refusing to cause a scene. Instead, she stood, grabbed her files, and walked past him into his office, slamming the door shut behind her. The entire office watched in stunned silence. The drive home was tense. Simone stared out the window, arms crossed, while Christopher's grip on the steering wheel was tight enough to turn his knuckles white. Neither spoke a word. The moment they stepped into the house, Simone whirled around, her fury finally spilling out. "What the hell was that today?" Christopher loosened his tie, his expression unreadable. "I don't know what you're talking about. Don't act dumb. You humiliated me in front of everyone because a colleague asked me to lunch?" Simone's voice was rising with every word. Christopher's jaw clenched. "He was flirting with you." "So?" she shot back. "I'm allowed to talk to people. Or do you control that too?" His silence spoke volumes. Simone let out a humorless laugh. "Oh my God, you're actually jealous." Christopher's eyes darkened. "You're imagining things." "Am I?" She took a step closer, staring him down. "You can bring home random women, but I can't even have a conversation with a friend?" His jaw twitched, but he didn't deny it. Instead, he turned away, running a frustrated hand through his hair. "I don't want to have this conversation." Simone shook her head in disbelief. "That's the problem, Christopher. You never want to have any conversation that makes you face your own feelings." She stormed past him, heading to her room, but just as she reached the stairs, he called out, "I don't like seeing you with other men." Simone froze. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears as she slowly turned to face him. Christopher's expression was raw, vulnerable in a way she had never seen before, and for the first time she didn't know what to say. Christopher hated feeling out of control. He had spent years mastering the art of indifference, keeping emotions at bay. But Simone had shattered his carefully built walls with a single glance, a simple conversation, a moment of defiance. He couldn't stand it, and so he did what he knew best. He ran. That weekend, he went out every night. He drowned himself in work during the day and surrounded himself with beautiful, willing women at night. Women who laughed at his jokes, touched him without hesitation, and whispered sweet nothings in his ear. But none of them were her. He brought one home, a stunning model with caramel skin and a body that most men would kill for. She draped herself over him as they entered his bedroom, pressing soft kisses along his jaw. He closed his eyes, trying to will himself to respond, to feel something, anything. But the moment her lips met his entire body recoiled. "What's wrong?" she asked, frowning. Christopher pulled away, frustration clawing at him. "I'm tired. You should go." The woman looked insulted but didn't argue. Once she was gone, Christopher sat on the edge of his bed, gripping his temples. What was happening to him? He had never had a problem before, but now, every time he tried to be with another woman, his mind went back to Simone. Her laugh, her fiery attitude, the way she challenged him, the way she made him feel things he didn't want to feel. Cursing under his breath, he grabbed his phone and stared at her contact. He wanted to call her, demand that she come to him. But what right did he have? So instead, he did nothing. He let the emptiness consume him, knowing deep down that no matter how hard he tried to fight it, there was only one woman he truly wanted. Simone sat in the living room, her fingers absent-mindedly flipping through a book she wasn't reading. Christopher had been distant all weekend, coming home late and avoiding her. She told herself she didn't care, but the lingering tension in the air made it impossible to ignore. Something was wrong, and she knew deep down it had to do with her. Just as she was about to head to bed, the sound of the front door unlocking made her pause. Christopher stepped inside, his jacket slung over his shoulder, looking exhausted and tense. His hair was slightly disheveled, and there was a deep furrow between his brows. He stopped when he saw her, his eyes darkening slightly, as if he hadn't expected her to still be awake. "You're late," she murmured, watching him closely. He scoffed, dropping his keys onto the table. "Didn't realize I had a curfew." Simone rolled her eyes. "I wasn't waiting for you, if that's what you're thinking." He let out a humorless chuckle. "Good." Silence stretched between them, thick and charged. Simone could feel something off about him, something troubled. The Christopher Aiken she knew never let his guard down, but tonight, he looked like a man fighting demons he couldn't escape. "Chris," she started softly, taking a step toward him. "Are you okay?" His jaw clenched. "Go to bed, Simone." She hesitated, but when she saw the way his hands were curled into fists at his sides, the way his entire body was rigid with tension, she knew there was more to his turmoil than he was willing to admit, but she also knew he wasn't ready to talk. So she turned, leaving him to battle whatever war was raging inside him. She just wished she knew why she cared so much. The following day, Christopher buried himself in work. He spent the entire morning in meetings, drowning in paperwork, trying to shake the thoughts of Simone from his mind. But no matter how much he distracted himself, the memory of her scent, her smile, the way she looked at him like she saw through every wall he put up haunted him. He needed a break. Stepping out of his office, he went to the lounge where a few executives were chatting over coffee. To his irritation, Simone was there, standing with Toby again, laughing at something he said. Christopher's grip on his coffee cup tightened. That damn finance executive again. Before he could stop himself, he strode up to them. "Simone, in my office. Now." The room fell silent. Toby frowned. "Is everything okay, sir?" Christopher didn't even spare him a glance. "Simone doesn't need you to speak for her." Simone's eyes flashed with irritation, but she set her cup down and followed him. The moment they were inside his office, she turned on him. "What the hell is your problem?" Christopher ran a hand through his hair, pacing. "My problem? You're the one acting like this is some social event instead of a workplace." Simone folded her arms. "You keep pulling me away from conversations, snapping at anyone who comes near me. What is it, Christopher?" "Just say it." He stopped pacing, his eyes locking onto hers, something dangerous and unguarded in them. "I can't stand seeing you with him." Simone inhaled sharply, but before she could respond, Christopher shook his head as if shaking off a spell. "Forget it," he muttered. "Go back to work." But they both knew something irreversible had just been said. Simone couldn't focus for the rest of the day. Christopher's words played over and over in her head. "I can't stand seeing you with him." What did he mean? Why did he care? He had spent weeks treating her like she was just another assistant, and now suddenly he was acting like a jealous lover. She needed answers. That evening, as soon as she got home, she found Christopher in his study, sipping whiskey and staring out the window. She didn't knock. She just walked in, arms crossed, determination written all over her face. "Say it again." He turned, his brows furrowed. "Say what again?" Simone stepped closer. "That you can't stand seeing me with another man. that you care, that this, she motioned between them, is more than just a business arrangement. Christopher's jaw clenched. You're imagining things. Simone let out a bitter laugh. Oh, really? Then why do you keep interfering in my life? Why do you get jealous? Why do you act like I belong to you? Christopher's eyes darkened. Because you do. Silence. Simone's breath hitched, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure he could hear it. But before she could say anything, Christopher downed his whiskey, slammed the glass into the table, and strode past her, leaving her standing there, shaken and breathless. The next morning, Christopher was gone before Simone woke up. Not that she was surprised. He was running, again. It was what he did best, but she wasn't going to chase him. She had her own pride, and if he wanted to pretend nothing had happened, then fine. She would pretend too. At work, she buried herself in reports, ignoring the way her body tensed every time the door to Christopher's office opened. He didn't call her in once. No snide remarks, no unnecessary meetings, no cold stares. Just silence. It was infuriating. By lunchtime, Toby appeared at her desk again, grinning. Still up for that lunch? Simone hesitated. She knew exactly what Christopher would think if she said yes, but she also knew she couldn't keep living in his shadow, waiting for him to figure himself out. Sure, she said, standing up. Let's go. As they left, she could feel the weight of Christopher's stare burning into her back, even though she never turned around. Christopher was livid watching Simone walk out of the office with Toby made his blood boil. He clenched his fists so tightly that his nails nearly cut into his palms. He had spent the entire night convincing himself that she meant nothing, that his reaction yesterday was just a moment of weakness. But now, seeing her with another man, he knew he had been lying to himself. She wasn't his, but he wanted her to be. Before he could think, he was on his feet, heading towards the elevator. By the time he reached the restaurant, Simone and Toby were already seated, laughing at something. It took every ounce of control he had not to drag her away from the table. Instead, he walked straight up to them. Simone, he said, his voice dangerously low. She looked up startled. Christopher, what are you? We need to talk. Now, Toby frowned. Actually, we're in the middle of... Christopher's glare was enough to silence him. Simone sighed, clearly irritated, but she excused herself and followed Christopher outside. The moment they were alone, he turned to her, his entire body vibrating with restrained fury. You're done entertaining him. Simone's mouth fell open. Excuse me? I mean it, Simone. You want to make a point? Fine, you've made it. But this stops now. Simone's eyes flashed. And why exactly should I listen to you? Christopher stepped closer, invading her space. Because you belong to me, and I don't share. The words hung thick in the air between them, suffocating and intoxicating. Simone's heart pounded, her breath shallow. This was it, the moment where everything shifted, where there was no turning back. Then prove it, she whispered, daring him, and Christopher Aiken never backed down from a challenge. The dinner table was quiet, the only sound coming from the faint clinking of cutlery against porcelain. Christopher had invited his mother, Rebecca Aiken, to dinner that evening, not realizing it would turn into a disaster. Rebecca, an elegant woman with sharp eyes and an even sharper tongue, studied Simone from across the table. The air was thick with tension, and Simone could feel the older woman's scrutiny like a dagger against her skin. Finally, Rebecca set down her glass of wine and spoke, her voice cool and controlled. Christopher, I've been meaning to speak to you about something important. Christopher barely glanced up. Go on. Rebecca's gaze didn't leave Simone. It's about your assistant. Simone tensed, her grip on her fork tightening. Mother! I just think, Rebecca continued, ignoring Christopher's warning tone, that a man of your stature should be with someone of equal standing, not a girl from nowhere. Simone's breath hitched, her stomach twisting painfully. She had expected resistance, but hearing the words spoken so bluntly still stung Christopher's jaw clenched. That's enough! Is it? Rebecca arched a brow. I mean, really, Christopher, do you think she fits into your world? She has no background, no family worth mentioning. Mother! Christopher's voice was sharp, but the damage was done. Simone's throat tightened. She couldn't sit there and listen to this anymore. She pushed back her chair, standing abruptly. "Excuse me." Christopher reached for her hand, but she pulled away. "Simone." "I need some air," she murmured, before walking out of the dining room, her heart shattering with every step. Simone didn't stop until she reached her room. Her hands trembled as she packed her suitcase, shoving clothes into it without thinking. She couldn't stay. Not after hearing those words. Not after realizing that Christopher might never be able to stand up for her against his family. A knock came at the door. "Simone, open the door!" It was Christopher. She squeezed her eyes shut, her heart aching. "Please, don't do this." His voice was hoarse, laced with frustration. "My mother doesn't decide who I love." Simone's breath caught. "Love?" She shook her head. "Christopher, if you really believed that, you would have shut her down the moment she opened her mouth. Instead, you let her say those things." Silence. She exhaled shakily, zipping her bag. "I need to go." "Where?" His voice was desperate now. "Where will you go?" She swallowed the lump in her throat. "To my friend's place. I need space." Another silence. Then finally he spoke. "Simone, if you walk out that door, I don't know if I can let you go." Her chest tightened. She turned the knob anyway, and with tears streaming down her face, she walked away. Christopher had never felt so hollow. For days, he was a ghost of himself. He stopped going to work, barely ate, barely spoke. His staff whispered about his mood, how he locked himself in his office, staring at nothing for hours. The usual powerful, calculating CEO had become a man undone, a shadow of himself. He buried himself in work, trying to convince himself it didn't matter, that she would come back. But every time he entered his home and found it empty of her presence, the ache in his chest deepened. The mansion felt cold, lifeless. He had spent years living in it alone, but now it felt unbearable. His employees noticed. His best friend Dell even asked, "What's wrong with you, man? You look like hell." Christopher didn't respond. How could he? He had pushed away the only woman who had ever truly seen him, who had loved him despite his flaws. He had let his mother's words drive her out, and now he was left drowning in his own regret. One evening, after yet another sleepless night, he sat in his office, a half-empty glass of whiskey in front of him. His mother walked in, studying him with narrowed eyes. "Christopher, you need to pull yourself together." He shot her a cold look. "The same way you tried to pull me away from Simone?" Rebecca sighed, but there was a flicker of realization in her eyes. Her son was truly in love with this woman. She had underestimated what Simone meant to him. For the first time, Rebecca Aiken felt the sting of regret. Rebecca Aiken was a proud woman, but she was no fool. She had seen her son with many women, models, socialites, heiresses. None of them had made him fall apart the way Simone had. The truth was undeniable. Christopher wasn't himself without Simone, and Rebecca, despite all her pride, had to accept that she had played a role in this downfall. So she did something she had never done before. She swallowed her pride and went looking for Simone. When she arrived at Simone's friend's apartment, the young woman looked stunned to see her. So was Rebecca. This wasn't some helpless girl. This was a woman who had left the wealth, the mansion, the luxury, all because she refused to be treated as less than. Rebecca took a breath before speaking. "May I come in?" Simone hesitated before stepping aside, leading her to the small but cozy living room. Rebecca sat, hands folded on her lap, before looking directly at her. "I owe you an apology." Simone blinked in shock. "What?" Rebecca inhaled deeply. "I was wrong about you, and I see that now. I thought love was about status and compatibility, but it's about who makes you whole, and Christopher, he is not whole without you." Simone's throat tightened. She had missed him too. Every single day. Rebecca met her gaze, sincerity in her eyes. "I may not have approved of you at first, but I have never seen my son fight for someone the way he fights for you. He is miserable without you, and I can't watch my son suffer." Tears welled in Simone's eyes, but she didn't speak. Rebecca reached out, placing a hand gently over hers. "Please, Simone, Come home. And in that moment, Simone knew. This wasn't just about Christopher. It was about being brave enough to fight for what they had, no matter what stood in their way. Christopher sat on the balcony of his mansion, the cool night breeze doing little to calm the storm raging inside him. His whiskey sat untouched beside him, the ice long melted. The once pristine home, which had always felt too big, now felt like a prison of his own making. He had gone through the motions, but nothing felt the same. Work no longer consumed him. His world, once structured and controlled, had unraveled in ways he never thought possible, and all because of her. He leaned forward, rubbing his temples, when he heard a sound that made his breath hitch. A soft knock on the door. He turned sharply, expecting a staff member. But the moment his eyes landed on the figure standing before him, his heart stopped. Simone. She stood there looking as breathtaking as ever, her face unreadable, but her eyes held something he hadn't seen in weeks. A glimmer of hope. Christopher shot up from his seat, his voice hoarse. Simone? She stepped forward, clasping her hands together. Your mother came to see me. He exhaled sharply. I didn't send her. I know, she whispered. She apologized. Christopher swallowed, his throat suddenly dry. And did you forgive her? Simone nodded slowly. Yes, because she realized something important. He took a cautious step toward her. What's that? She hesitated, her lips parting before she spoke the words that sent his world spinning. That I was never leaving for good. Because I love you, Christopher. And no one, not your mother, not society, gets to decide that. For the first time in weeks, Christopher could breathe again. He didn't wait. He closed the distance between them, his hands framing her face gently as he whispered, Say it again. Simone's eyes gleamed as she smiled. I love you. Christopher's lips crashed onto hers, a kiss filled with everything he had been holding back. Every unsaid word, every regret, every promise of forever. He poured himself into that moment, vowing that he would never let her go again. When they finally pulled apart, he rested his forehead against hers, his voice low. I almost lost you, she smirked softly. But you didn't. He pressed a lingering kiss to her temple. No, because you were always mine. The ballroom of Lagos's most prestigious hotel was bathed in warm golden light, its chandeliers shimmering like stars above the elegantly dressed guests. Tonight was not just another social event. It was a night that marked the beginning of forever. Christopher Akins stood at the center of the room, dressed in a perfectly tailored black tuxedo, his eyes locked on the woman who had changed his life. Simone Oko, his future, his love. She stood at the top of the grand staircase, a vision in an exquisite ivory gown, her dark skin glowing against the delicate lace and silk. She wasn't just beautiful, she was breathtaking. As she descended, every guest turned to watch, but for Christopher, she was the only one in the room. His heartbeat thundered in his chest as she walked toward him, her smile soft yet filled with confidence. She had walked away once, but now she was walking toward him, toward their future. When she finally reached him, he took her hand, pressing a slow, reverent kiss to her fingers. You're stunning, Simone chuckled. You say that like you're surprised, he smirked. I've always known. The ceremony was intimate yet grand, filled with vows spoken from the depths of their souls. When Christopher slipped the diamond ring onto her finger, his voice was unwavering. From the moment I met you, you challenged me. You saw me for who I was and never let me hide behind the walls I built. I don't know what I did to deserve you, but I promise I will never take you for granted. You are my heart, Simone, and you always will be. Tears welled in Simone's eyes as she whispered her own vow. You were the man I never expected. Cold, ruthless, impossible. And yet behind all of that, you were the one who made me feel safe, the one who gave me a home in a world that never truly accepted me. I love you, Christopher Aiken, not for who people think you are, but for who I know you to be. And I will love you for the rest of my life. A hush fell over the crowd as the officiant announced, You may kiss the bride. Christopher didn't hesitate. He cupped her face, pulling her into a kiss so deep, so consuming, that the entire ballroom erupted into cheers and applause. The world blurred away, leaving only the two of them in that perfect moment. The night stretched on in a whirlwind of love and celebration. They danced, their bodies pressed close, Christopher's hands firm on her waist as he whispered against her ear. "Are you happy?" Simone looked up at him, eyes shining. "Happier than I ever thought possible." His fingers tightened around hers. "Good, because this is just the beginning." Later, when they stepped onto the private balcony away from the crowd, Christopher wrapped his arms around her from behind, pressing a kiss to her bare shoulder. "You were always meant to be mine." She turned in his arms, tracing his jawline with her fingers. "And you were always meant to love me." His lips found hers once more, slow and deep, a silent promise of forever. The night sky stretched above them, and as they held each other, they knew this was the kind of love that lasted a lifetime.